with the first team we want to preview in this series, it is going to be the reigning AFC champions, the New England Patriots. Brady, let's talk about New England coming off a really high year last year where, the expectations weren't super high. They made the Super Bowl. Talk to me about that run that they went on.
Well, you mentioned expectations, and that's the first thing that is different between last year and this year. Last year is kind of playing with house money all throughout the season. Year one of Mike Vrabel, full time starting year one for Drake Maye. There wasn't really a whole lot in the department of the receiver room, and the defense was kind of a question mark. Now going into this year, the defense is really good. You saw the playoff performance that they put up. They made some additions on the defensive side of the football. They made additions in the wide receiver room. The big thing that everybody's going to be waiting for is how do the Patriots fare against stronger competition? They're playing a first place schedule this season. They're playing the NFC North. They're playing the AFC West. They're playing first place teams throughout the year. It's going to be more challenging for them. I really like offseason moves that they made on the defensive side. You add Kevin Byard, who was an all-pro last year. He's getting a little bit older, but he's going to bring a wealth of experience and obviously still a high level of play to that secondary room with Christian Gonzalez, who it seems imminent that he's about to get a major extension to be the highest paid cornerback in the NFL. You've got Carlton Davis, Marcus Jones. I do worry a little bit about how they're going to get pressure off the edge. A lot of it's going to come down to how Gabe Jackus plays from Illinois and how he does as a first-year edge guy. They brought in Draymond Jones. They lost Caleb Chason, but I think that the deficiencies that they have on the edge should be made up for by the interior guys that they have, the duo of Christian Barmore and Milton Williams. We saw what they could do all throughout January. They're a force on the inside. And then on the offensive side, you get to bump Jared Wilson from left guard, where he wasn't great, to his natural position of center, which is kind of what the Patriots always envisioned. You still got Will Campbell at left tackle, and to me, kind of a prove it year because you drafted Caleb Lomu, and if Will Campbell doesn't fit the bill, he might get bumped over to guard, depending on what happens with Elijah Vera Tucker, who they brought in, who should be really good. Will Campbell's going to have to prove it at left tackle. You've got Vera Tucker at left guard, Wilson at center. The right side should be stout, just like it was last year with Morgan Moses and Owenu. And I think Lomu will work in as an extra tackle on those heavy sets. I think offensively, the thing that you look at clearly is the receiver room. You bring in A.J. Brown, who I think people are a little bit confused of what he is. They think just because the numbers were down last year that he is down as a player. And if you watch the tape, I disagree with that statement completely. I think he was in a complete train wreck of an offense with a quarterback that wasn't quite built for his style of play. I think Drake Maye is a great play style quarterback for AJ Brown. He throws the ball deep. He wants to feed AJ Brown. He wants to spam targets to him, and that's what AJ needs, a guy that you need to stay locked in and attentive at all times. He is a little bit of a prima donna when it comes to that wide receiver position. And then you add Romeo Dobbs. To me, that's one of the most underrated of the additions that the Patriots made. He was really, really good in Green Bay in an offense where nobody really week to week gets 8 to 10 targets. Not that he's going to get 8 to 10 in New England, but he's going to be a red zone force. I'm really excited for this team. I think that this team is going to go 12-5. I think they're going to win the AFC East, and I think they're going to be the number 3 seed in the AFC.
Yeah, and I mean, like, kind of backtracking on stuff a little bit here. This team was top 5 in offensive and defensive scoring last year, and everybody wants to talk about the schedule. It still takes a very well-rounded squad and a great coaching staff for that to happen. I think the biggest low-hanging fruit for this group was improvements in the weaponry around Drake Maye, the offensive line kind of coming together a little bit, and then defensively the sacks. And they were a top 5 defense in points per game allowed, despite ranking in the bottom half of the NFL in sacks last year. So while we do mention the concerns in that defensive line for New England this year, like, didn't matter as much last year. Now, the biggest thing is the strength of schedule difference, like that. It is going to change drastically compared to what they had last year. And everybody saw, the historic year Drake Maye had in terms of deep ball efficiency, all that type of metrics. He was great. This year, it's not going to be as sexy. It's not going to be as pretty, but the overall roster from New England is better than it was last year. The interesting part, I think, is the X factor with, the New England Patriots is what happens on that offensive line, because you mentioned the right side, Morgan Moses and Owenu are solid players. The left side, massive concerns over there, and we saw Will Campbell picked apart against the Seattle Seahawks in the Super Bowl, and Drake Maye couldn't do anything. And Drake Maye himself has really struggled holding on the ball a little bit too long. He's going to see a better schedule this year, and I'm interested to see what the game plan and development was for Drake Maye this offseason, whether it was getting out the ball quicker, whether this offense is going to be more structured around getting the ball underneath, and then A.J. Brown on those contested catches. And I think you mentioned Romeo Doubs, a player that I think is going to be a sneaky X factor for this offense, and that, slot role mixing in there, which will be really big for them. The biggest headline from this offseason, though, is Mike Vrabel. We all know Vrabes was up to some stuff this offseason. I'm interested to see how much that kind of carries over into the vibes in terms of what happens this year. I know it's not necessarily probably a massive deal in the locker room, but over time, that story is going to continue to
Well,
continue to
yeah, it'll
build
be a
up.
story that follows the team throughout the year,
Yeah,
especially
throughout
if
the
they got
entire
off to
year.
a slow start.
Yeah, 100%. And you look at like New England last year, 14 wins. I think their over and under total is at 10.5 right now. I think that's a good line for them. Like, I see this team kind of around that 11 win mark, 12 win mark maybe. I'd say under is kind of tough for me to see, but I think worst case scenario for New England would be if they're falling under that 10.5 mark, their offensive line is not performing at the level that they should be. I think you have injuries in that wide receiver position. Like, that's the thing. Like, you traded for A.J. Brown and Romeo Doubs, but both those players have had their fair share of problems staying consistently on the field for an entire season. So you're banking
Yeah.
on those guys staying healthy. And then you mentioned the pass rush defensively. Christian Gonzalez can be the best corner in the world. And I think, a Kevin Byard addition was really big for adding more turnovers and splash plays in that secondary. But if they can't get pass rush on the edge, like, that's going to be their pure kryptonite. So, based on kind of what we're talking about, we're right in that 10 to 12 range win for New England this year. So, where do you think, like, Patriots, like, what you think this is Super Bowl or bust for them this year? Or do you think they would be content with like a championship game appearance, something like that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's Super Bowl or bust, especially with how young this core still is and how hard it is to get back to the Super Bowl consecutive years. It's unless you're Mahomes or Brady, like that's a really tough thing to do, especially as a young guy. Drake Maye, 24 years old, second year as a full time starter. But I think that this team definitely does have like just the mindset that you see with this team that the goal is get to the Super Bowl, avenge the loss last year. And I think that this team is going to be in the mix. I think you look at the AFC and you look at the power players. I think it's Buffalo with Josh Allen. Obviously, they've always got the potential, even if they haven't done it yet. Same thing with Baltimore and Lamar Jackson. I think Denver, despite question marks with Bo Nix and everything, I think they've got a great roster and can make it. The Chiefs, you can never count them out. But I think the Patriots are right in that tier of teams that you wouldn't be surprised unless you're just like hating. I don't think you'd be surprised to, hey, Patriots made the Super Bowl again. They won the AFC, or the Patriots were in the AFC Championship game and were a drive away from going back to the Super Bowl. I don't think anyone like truly being objective would be surprised by any of that. So I think that the goal is the first goal is to win the AFC East again and repeat that. I think go from there. Anything short of being in the divisional round is a disappointment.
Yeah, I think to close up the New England Patriots preview for this season, you look at like the schedule, it's obviously going to be harder than last year. It doesn't get much easier than that, but they actually have the 10th easiest schedule according to Vegas win totals. So you look at some of these tougher teams, right? This was a weird,
Shout out the Jets and Dolphins.
yeah, it was a weird vacuum this year where, some of these teams, like, they're going to get, I think with the Patriots, the biggest thing on their schedule that they worry about is who is lining up at edge for the other team and if that's going to completely derail their game plan. I don't think some of these teams that they are going to line up against necessarily have those edges, so they should be chilling. But I think with New England, we're seeing them. I agree with you. It's not a Super Bowl or bust year for them. I think last year they were way ahead of schedule. This is another building block for them. If they do make the Super Bowl and win it this year, I'm not going to say I'm surprised because this is a better roster than they have, in the past. But I think with New England, we're expecting them to maybe be a divisional team, fight for a conference championship appearance. Winning the division is so tough for me to, go out and say right now. I can't talk about. I think I'm gonna have to wait a little bit on who I'm picking for the East
Well,
right
hey,
now
it
because it's
comes
close.
down to we'll talk about Buffalo here in a few minutes, but it's going to come down to those two games against Buffalo. It's going to come down to Drake Maye
Yep.
against Josh Allen, and I will be Blitz Sports Media will be in attendance for the one in Foxborough, so we'll have on-site coverage of that one in December.
Absolutely. So yeah, that is our New England Patriots preview right there. Both of us think they're going to be very good and can be competing for another deep playoff run.